So I've been wanting to make this video for a very long time and have just never sat down to be able to do it for whatever reason. One thing or another happened that precluded me from actually sitting down and recording the audio for it. But the video in particular that I'm going to do today is who are my influences as a writer. And this is something that I have pondered over the course of my, about maybe 8 years of creative writing. And for quite a bit of that time, I have had a very changeable set of writers that I did in fact like. And of course, some of those would, in the end, fall by the wayside as the years elapsed. But as I look back on it, there seem really to be only 4 writers in particular who, in this pantheon of influence, seem to me to be pivotal in my own formation as a writer myself. And I want to list them here and give my reason for their impact on me, and perhaps maybe even explain why it is that I like them so much and how I try and incorporate some of their methods into my own writing. So, the first writer that comes to mind for me that really did, I suppose, make a profound impact on me is George Orwell, or Mr. Eric Arthur Blair, if you don't know his real name. Now, George Orwell is a curious figure because, I've only really ever liked one of his books, and of course that book is Animal Farm. It held the record for being my favorite book of all time for about 6 or 7 years. And it was actually quite ridiculous how obsessed I was with that book. I read it at least once a month, 1 year, and it was actually quite absurd just how addled I was with it. But anyhow, Animal Farm is tremendous. It's my 3rd favorite book of all time, and it's basically a shorter, better written, and more effective version of 1984, which is bone dry and practically unreadable. And when examining Orwell as a person, as a writer himself, he seemed really to be very insightful of the craft. If you read some of his essays, like Politics in the English Language or Why I Write, there's quite a lot there that can be gleaned if you are indeed a burgeoning writer. I do recommend you read all of his essays. Shooting an Elephant, even though that's not really centered around writing, is almost like a short story. But in fact, he does have quite a lot to say about the whole writing thing. He famously said that writing should be like a sheet of glass, in that you see through it and it doesn't obstruct your vision of the story. And that's a very good piece of advice. But reading Orwell's writings when I was about maybe 15 or 14, I began to realize that the writing I was doing up until that point was very just frivolous and not at all memorable or significant. And this man actually taught me to take writing seriously. If you read the book Animal Farm, it has a definite structure to it. Every paragraph is constructed in a way to where everything has meaning, even though it may not seem that way, but just the mechanics of the prose itself, not in terms of what it has to say, but just how it's put together. Everything has a purpose, and basically, Orwell gave me that skill to take writing not only as perhaps a career, but also as a meticulous sort of an art form that needs quite a lot of skill and effort and consideration in order to execute properly. And I've pretty much been trying to be up to snuff as I can with some of his teachings and such, and I do believe that I have succeeded in that avenue. So George Orwell is, I suppose, the first of my major influences. The second one, and not to mention that he is also a master satirist, and I do play around with satire as well quite a bit. So there's that. The second one that comes to mind, I read about maybe a year after Orwell, and I was 16, and at the time, none of what was written didn't really register for me. I was on a sort of symbolic or just mechanical level. I was just sort of enraptured by the stories that this fellow had conjured up in his mind, and was just taken away by how excellent a science fiction writer he was. And that fellow is H.G.Wells, Herbert George Wells, for any of you who don't know his actual name. That's not the abbreviation. So I've obviously read quite a lot of H.G. Wells over the years. I started out with The Time Machine, and then I read War of the Worlds, and then one of my favorite Wells books, The Island of Dr. Moreau, and then obviously The Invisible Man, select short stories of his. But the two books that really do stick out in my mind from him are A Modern Utopia and Men Like Gods. Now, I talked about those books in the past on my top 10 favorite novels of all time video, but so if you want to hear my reasons for why I like them so much, just refer to that. But as I was reading some of the passages in there, there is just great writing, paragraph after paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, and it's not boring at all. It's actually quite engaging, exceedingly insightful. It says, every sentence almost says something about humanity. None of this seemed to register at all for me as a 16-year-old teenager just reading Wells for the enjoyment of the story. As a 22-year-old man, his writing really does speak to me, and it is something to which I myself aspire. Though I don't do it tremendously often, only when it warrants execution. And for that reason, I suppose, H.G. Wells is also among my list of influences. The third writer I read about the same time as Wells, and I had, I suppose, an insular knowledge of horror writing, classic horror writing. I read select stories that were well known, such as W.W. Jacobs's The Monkey's Paw, and a lot of Edgar Allan Poe. Though, to be honest, Poe, I'll do video on Poe here eventually, but Poe is fairly overwrought and not, though he is, I suppose you can make a claim for greatness for him because he did experiment in a lot of genres and basically invented mystery. Some of his stuff I have difficulty in deciphering. But I was reading through all these folks, and there was one name in particular who I was familiar with, but I did not necessarily come upon until I was 16 or 17, however old I was. And that fellow is H.P. Lovecraft, Howard Phillips Lovecraft, if you don't know the real name from the abbreviation. And this man, apart from creating an utterly immersive universe to which other writers have added unnumbered installments and just embellishments, this man also has a blatant and ardent philosophy in his work, that being that we as humans are insignificant and mean nothing, and that there are indeed forces greater than ours just beyond this scrim of reality, and really that we are just subject to their devices. And there is a quote by him that I always remembered and look back on fondly. The oldest and strongest fear, or the oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest fear is that of the unknown, which asserts, in my mind, the theory that fiction is stranger than truth. Because, let me tell you one thing. Misfortune in real life is far too regular a burden to be taken with even a modicum of seriousness. One may well hear about, let us say, the harrowing account of a lady who is unhappily accosted by a lecherous interloper, but there are far too many, I suppose, wandering philanderers on the continents as to make anyone agnostic of any emotion outside of remorse. There's no terror in what is known, and therefore Lovecraft is indeed among my set of influences, and the reason why also I admire him exceedingly is because he actually wrote the only piece of fiction that did legitimately frighten me. And I've talked about this a number of times before. It is his story, The Hound. If it is read when the stars are right in an empty house, it will leave anyone greatly shaken. And nothing I have read before or since has impacted me in such a way. Not even anything by Shirley Jackson or Stephen King or Arthur Machen or Algernon Blackwood. Lovecraft did it for me, and it is for that reason, among many others, that he is among my, I suppose, private circle of influences. And now the last writer here is obvious. You all know very well who this particular author is. He is the man who did, in fact, get me into both writing and reading. Not in that order, but nonetheless, he is a paramount figure in my literary journey as a man of letters. And if you don't know by now, I'm just going to outright say it. It's Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sir Arthur Ignatius, or Ignatius, however you want to say it, Conan Doyle. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, apart from creating basically the most well-known detective in all of fiction, has himself the most boundless imagination that I've seen from really any classic writer. I've not read Clive Barker yet, even though Ahab says that he is indeed wildly imaginative. But Conan Doyle, he's so much more than just the creator of Sherlock Holmes. He has written vastly and prolifically in a number of genres. He has written historical novels, he's written science fiction, he's written horror, he's written romance, he's written poetry. He's even written a treatise on basically the ivory trade in the Congo, in the Belgian Congo back in those days. He's written all sorts of things on all sorts of subjects. Conan Doyle also holds the distinction of being the best crafter of characters that I have ever encountered. You read Orwell for the technique and the occasional observations. You read Wells for the meditations and just really truisms on humanity. You read Lovecraft for just the ideas and the horror connotations in his work. But Conan Doyle, he makes characters that are both lovable, enraging, and utterly unforgettable. You feel as though you've known them yourself. And I very well try and make characters in that fashion. There is no other man or woman, I think, in literature who has made as many engaging characters over the years, from Sherlock to Professor Challenger to Brigadier Gerard, that I've come across in all of literature. Do let me know if you can find another one. And his book, The Lost World, which is, in my opinion, the pinnacle of all of literature, though some people don't think so, and they're entitled to their opinion, will forever be a part of me in more ways than one. Not only is it the inaugural instance in which dinosaurs are mentioned in fiction, it is also, if you were to read it for yourself, perhaps maybe my handbook on writing well. I read it when I was 12 years of age, and I had basically sort of thought that I may as well maybe try and rewrite it, and did a terrible job at it. I actually the other year found the old manuscripts of my entire Lost World series that I'm thinking of reading sometime. I may even do it live, and that will be an experience, I guarantee you that. But that book is profoundly important to me, and if you were to read it in the proper context, you will see that it is indeed much more than a story about a lost land where dinosaurs continued to endure into the 20th century. And Conan Doyle's all over my writing, along with these other three people, and he will continue to be. In my mind, there is no finer writer who's ever lived, and it is to him that I aspire most often in my own writing. And it is also him that I successfully emulate, I find, in my own writing. And I intend to read everything by him. I've not done so yet, but basically everything that he's written is worth consideration. And it is for all those reasons that he is also, perhaps maybe the most important writer, most important influence in my own writing life. Oh, and I'd also like to mention here that he employs all of these techniques of achieving greatness and such, that all of these previous writers I've discussed have done so, and does so perhaps more successfully than anybody else I've ever read. So that's why also. So that's the video that on my, I guess, my influences as a writer. I hope you enjoyed it. I just decided to sit down one day and try and unpack just what I thought, who I thought really were, I suppose, maybe the major contenders. And these are the ones that over the years have come to mind. And there's going to be another video, hopefully next week, coming out, discussing why it is that I discern them to be so. And stay tuned for that. Perhaps maybe if you yourself are a writer, make a concomitant video or perhaps a concomitant comment in the comment section down below explaining your own influences and why it is that you think they are. And we'll start a very nice little exchange based around that. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you have a good morning, midday, afternoon, evening, midnight, whenever you plan on seeing this. My voice is getting quite a bit scratchy because I've been talking for so long, and we'll be seeing you here very soon. Cheers.